Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. It is Tuesday, May 27th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with legal correspondent Jeremy Sharon and health reporter Diana Bletter, who continues to report in the North. Hi, good morning to both of you.
Good morning, Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, good morning to you both. It is day 599 of the war. Another morning began with a downed missile from Yemen that triggered sirens in the Jordan Valley and northern West Bank with no reports of injuries or damage. A new Gaza aid body started operating in the Gaza Strip yesterday, while in regard to the hostages, U.S. Special Envoy to the Mideast Steve Witkoff called on Hamas to take the deal that is currently on the table, which would have Israel agree to a temporary ceasefire with returning half of those who are still living and half of those who are deceased returning to Israel. It would also then, in theory, lead to substantive negotiations toward a permanent ceasefire. We'll also talk about the latest in the ongoing crisis regarding the appointment of a new Shin Bet chief and how several Israeli hospitals prepared for hostages released into their care, as well as the Druze and their brethren in Syria. Stay with us.
Jews have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you, Mr. President, for Jerusalem. No, thank you for banning Arabs. His message on anti-Semitism is a good message. Trump is saying all the right things, and he may even be doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons. It's a dilemma for us, but I think we still have to stand up for the institutions, for due process, even if the wrong things that he's doing help us in the long term.
I just don't see how they help us at all, because I think in the long
run, there needs to be consequences. You can go up, you can march with a Palestinian flag. God bless you. That's fine. But if you use that flag to stop a Jewish students to go to class or beat them up, that's not freedom of speech. There needs to be consequences.
Okay, Jeremy, you had an extremely busy day of reporting yesterday, to put it mildly. I'm going to review the latest with the matter of the Shin Bet chief, the outgoing Shin Bet chief, the incoming Shin Bet chief, whoever that may be, the Attorney General, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So you'll take us through parts of this, but just to review, Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar's resignation is slated to take place in June, on June 15th, correct? The High Court and the Attorney General told the Prime Minister, this is back last week, that he cannot appoint his own Shin Bet chief. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, then went ahead and did that. He was then told that he has a conflict of interest in both hiring a new Shin Bet chief and having fired the previous Shin Bet chief, who of course resigned. And now the Attorney General, Gali Baharav-Miara, tells the Prime Minister that the appointment of a new Shin Bet chief, Major General David Zinni, this is what the Prime Minister did a few days ago, is invalid and unlawful, while several ministers call for her ouster. So that's where I'm taking us up to date. I am sure you have more details to share with us about that, but if you could tell us what is the next thing that could be unfolding from this? Like, what do you expect to be reporting in this brouhaha, for lack of a better term? And of course, if you have other details that you want to add to the background history, the most recent history, please do.
Yeah, so as you said, Jessica, this is I look at it as the gift that keeps on giving, or perhaps the story which is the curse that keeps on cursing. And this is a saga which started off with a great deal of controversy, and it's only getting worse. And so, as you said, we had a situation where the High Court of Justice said Netanyahu had a conflict of interest in firing the previous Shin Bet chief. The Attorney General then told Netanyahu not to make any moves to appoint a new Shin Bet chief until she works out the legal implications. He ignored that completely, says, I'm going to pick this guy, Major General David Zinni from the IDF. And now the Attorney General comes back and says, okay, you ignored what I said. I'm now telling you explicitly that because of the court ruling, you had a conflict of interest. And that also means that you had a conflict of interest in hiring anyone new, and the guy you've chosen, that process is now tainted. It's flawed because you had a conflict of interest. So we've got a real problem here because Netanyahu obviously wants his guy and that choice to go forward, but the Attorney General is saying that is inherently flawed now. So where does that leave Zinni? Well, the Attorney General, in her instructions to Netanyahu last night, said that she doesn't think that appointment can go forward because there's no way to remedy it. What would happen? Okay, what the Attorney General said is that now what needs to happen is that the Netanyahu needs to delegate his authority to nominate a candidate to head the Shin Bet to another government minister, and then the government minister, is supposed to interview a few people, choose one, and the cabinet will confirm that appointment. But now we've got this candidate, David Zinni. So what are we going to do with him? It doesn't seem to be any way to remedy that, because the Attorney General also said in her instructions that Netanyahu can't be involved in any way, directly or indirectly, in the appointment of the new Shin Bet chief, right? So, and she said that the delegated minister who has appointed him, who does select the candidate, that delegated minister must start the process from the beginning without any preconceived ideas. And she said explicitly he can't base his choice on the tainted process, I'm quoting exactly, that Netanyahu started. So, inevitably this thing is going to be petitioned back to the High Court. So what's the court going to say if whichever minister is delegated comes up with the same candidate, David Zinni, as Bibi did? Is the court going to say, oh yeah, well, I guess it's completely legitimate that the minister just happened to come up with the same candidate that Netanyahu did? Of course not. That seems ludicrous, and it seems very difficult now to imagine how the legal authorities, the Attorney General and the High Court of Justice, are going to agree to Zinni's appointment.
So then, Jeremy, okay, so then, but what happens if the prime minister or one of his minister who is assigned to handle this, if they say, sorry, that's what we're doing, we're going ahead? I imagine that's something you've thought of as well. This is where we're all heading.
And that would kind of see us, barreling down the road towards a constitutional crisis. Again, we've talked about this so many times, and I don't want to be, on the one hand, I don't want to be the guy who cries wolf, but, we also have to be aware of where we're going. And, constitutional crisis at the end of the day is where one of the institutions of state doesn't know who to listen to. So let's say the government goes ahead, whether it's Bibi or whether his minister, with a nod and a wink to Bibi, and they nominate Zinni and Zinni is appointed. So let's say Zinni is appointed. The court issues an interim order saying, that appointment cannot go ahead until it reviews the situation, right? And the government says, no, we don't care about you anymore. He's our pick. He's the guy in charge. So David Zinni turns up for his first day at the Shin Bet, headquarters. Well, who do the employees of the Shin Bet listen to? If he gives them instruction, is he the head of the Shin Bet, right? Who do the senior officials of the Shin Bet listen to? Do they listen to the court, who's saying he's not the head of the Shin Bet right now? Or do they listen to the government? There's a massive problem here in terms of the rule of law, that the institution doesn't know who to listen to. And that's really where we're headed if neither side backs down here. I don't know what's going to happen. Last night there wasn't an immediate denunciation of the Attorney General by the Prime Minister of that instructions. There were some reports that sources close to the Prime Minister said we're going to go ahead anyway. Right. It kind of remains to be seen, but this is the what lies ahead. It's very unclear. It's kind of uncharted territory. And we have to wait and see how the government reacts formally to what the Attorney General has said. I would say that the Attorney General also pointed out, she said, we're not the ones holding up the appointment here. The government and the government ministers who are criticizing the Attorney General are saying, this whole obstructionism is delaying the appointment of a crucial defense security agency head, and that's damaging to Israel's security. But the Attorney General's office is saying, if you just listen to us, then you can. Then these whole problems would be, would go much quicker. Remember, I've said this before. The Attorney General never told Netanyahu that he couldn't fire Ronen Bar. She just gave him instructions as to what he needs to do to make
How to
to
do
make
it.
that happen.
Mhm.
And again,
Right.
she never said that this government can't appoint a new Shin Bet chief. She just said to Bibi, just hold off, while I work out the legal instructions. Okay, so it turns out that it was almost inevitable that she would not allow Netanyahu to be involved in the appointment of a new Shin Bet chief because of what the High Court said. But still, the government could have done this in a quick process, to appoint, if Netanyahu would have listened to the Attorney General. But that's not what he wants to do because, as I've said again, many times, the government just wants to do exactly what it wants to do. It keeps saying that it is the expression of the sovereignty of the Jewish people because it is the elected government, and it doesn't want to hear about legal niceties and proper procedure. It doesn't want to hear about that. So that's where we are. We've got this clash between the legal establishment, the judiciary, and the government, and we'll see how we can't know how that's going to pan out, but we definitely can see the dangers ahead.
I want to also just point out another piece of news that you were reporting on yesterday, also having to do with the Attorney General, speaking at a Bar Association conference where she spoke very clearly and critically about what she said was the erosion of judicial independence. And of course, this is, this is side by side with what was ongoing in other parts of her day with this saga of the Shin Bet chief. How, the Bar Association conference comments, obviously you reported on it, and how much attention do you think is paid to what she said and to what others said at that conference?
Well, these are kind of general comments, and the Attorney General and also the President of the Supreme Court, Isaac Amit, also spoke, and they're giving a warning really of the situation, how they see it, of what they see as the attacks on the independence of the judiciary, and the efforts of the government to change Israel's democratic form of government. And that's exactly what Baharav-Miara said. She said that under the cover of war, with the public's attention diverted, this system, the government's efforts to change the system of democratic government in Israel have sped up greatly. That's what she said. She said Israel's form of government is changing in front of our eyes at a rapid pace. So, how much people pay attention to that, I'm not sure. But we're definitely, this is definitely the expression of the greater clash between the judiciary and this current government, where the government wants to restrain the judiciary, restrain the legal establishment, to shake off those shackles of restraint. And the judiciary, as the more it's attacked, the more it is, standing up on its hind legs and saying, we're not going to go down without a fight. There are principles in a democratic society of the rule of law, of how things must be done properly and in accordance with the law, and governments, however much they might be the expression of the sovereignty of and the will of the people, cannot just do what they want, because that is not how democratic societies which run according to the rule of law are managed. So, this is just the general expression of the legal establishment trying to warn the general public, I suppose, about what they see as the dangers of the government's path. And obviously, so the Attorney General was actually referring in particular, and Amit was referring in particular, to legislation which was passed a few months ago, where the judicial selection process for appointing judges was changed to give politicians a much greater say. And they say that this will affect the independence of the judiciary and mean that judges now look at the politicians and they'll be afraid to upset different sides of the political map in their rulings, because otherwise they won't get advancement, and that will affect the integrity and independence of the judiciary. So that's a major issue for the judiciary right now. Obviously, the whole issue with the Shin Bet chief and the government's refusal to listen to legal instructions, that's another part of the equation. This is all part of how the legal establishment and the judiciary are viewing the government's efforts to weaken them, and it's those two figures, the Attorney General and Isaac Amit, are seeing this as part of one general trend.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to take a quick break. When we're back, Diana will talk to us first about how several medical centers dealt with receiving hostages in those first days, in planning for it in those first days after October 7th. So stay with us.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
Okay, so Diana, obviously it has been many, many months since October 7th, 19 months, and the first hostages were received in November 2023, but clearly the hospitals are beginning to speak about this process now. You did an in-depth interview with doctors from Sheba Medical Center and speaking to other hospitals. Those who received hostages back in November, again in January 2025, those who were rescued. And it's a fascinating look about how they decided that they needed to figure out how to do this within days of October 7th. They realized that they were going to be called upon. So I'd love to hear more about it. How did they, what made them say within, I don't know, October 9th, October 10th, October 11th, we're going to have to handle this situation?
Thank you, Jessica. It's a good question. Well, they knew they had to innovate to rehabilitate because there are very few medical protocols on how to treat hostages who were returned from captivity, which is also a very rare event. So they practiced what they call psychological first aid, but they aimed it toward the situation, especially with children. And for example, children who were coming into Schneider's Children's Hospital, the staff found that they still wanted to do some of the routines that they did while they were in Gaza for the first few days. They wanted to sleep with short sleeve shirts if they had slept with short sleeve shirts in the tunnels in Hamas captivity, and the staff treated them in that way. But what was fascinating to me was how Dr. Shiloh at Sheba Medical Center said that there's known post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's what she calls a less known sister, post-traumatic growth, PTG, that she said that a lot of hostages, many will have long-term traumas, but she also saw the sense that life took on new meaning, and they felt a strength after having suffered through what she called the unthinkable. So that was very interesting. And also that she was working with longevity experts because she doesn't know the length of time that this trauma will last, but she tells the youth there that we want you to live a long time. We're going to be with you the whole time, and to maintain their health. And it isn't just the hostages that the hospitals are treating, it's the whole family, because they say that if one family member is abducted, the whole family is abducted.
Experiences it, sure.
Yes.
So, okay, so that's interesting. So you're saying that the hospitals are in touch with these families, both the released hostages and their families, for months and years to come. That relationship will continue on.
Correct. That's what they said to them. We're with you every step of the way.
So I'm curious, did they have anything to say about what they prepared for and what they actually experienced? In other words, you can only prepare for so much when you haven't done it. I imagine as hostages are released now, they know a lot more. But in those first waves of releases of 105 hostages back in 2023, did they feel that they had prepared properly? Did they know what they needed to know?
Well, it said that we're learning and unlearning and relearning, but at Bellinson Hospital also, they said that they went through somebody's body from the head to their toes, what might happen to a person after 100 days of captivity, after 200 days of captivity, their skin, their kidneys, their hair, everything. And they work with multidisciplinary teams that go in, and 2 doctors will come in, let's say a psychiatrist and an internist.
Are there any elements of care post-release that they are now looking at? Obviously, there's still several dozen hostages who are believe that they will be released home eventually alive. Are there any things that they're looking at differently than they looked at in the beginning?
Their health circumstances of these hostages are obviously getting worse and worse. So they are preparing for the worst. Somebody after 100 days of captivity is a lot healthier in a lot of ways than somebody who's been in captivity for 600 days.
Right.
So they are prepared for that.
For that eventuality. Okay. Let's move on to another topic that you've been covering really in an ongoing way, the Druze community in Israel, the Druze community up north. So obviously it's a society that's been part and parcel of Israel for decades, and even more so since October 7th. Druze soldiers who have been fighting, Druze soldiers who were killed, communities who supported other Jewish communities. But now the Druze also have relatives in Syria, and they want to help take care of them and are in very steady contact with them, is what I gathered from your piece. Tell us how you got to this story. I'd first like to hear about that.
Well, I heard about a woman in Yorka, but before that, I went to a conference that was organized at the Western Galilee College in Akko, talking to Druze people. Were talking about their identity, what was happening in Syria. The sheikh of the Druze community spoke and said that Israel has to do more. That was at the very start of the problems. The Druze were very concerned that the new Islamist government in Syria, they are saying, yes, 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 we'll give minorities freedom, but they're very afraid that it will be like the Taliban in Afghanistan, that eventually there won't be religious freedom. And there's now a medical facility in southern Syria that the Israeli army set up. There were more than 30 wounded Druze in Syria who were brought to hospitals in northern Israel and treated. And there is a great concern among the Druze here in Israel that their Druze brethren are under threat.
And they're in touch with them on a regular basis by text messaging and phone calls?
Yes, when I visited a woman in Yorka, which is in a Druze village in the Western Galilee, every few minutes she got notifications on WhatsApp from relatives in Syria talking about what was happening. They sent a photo of a man whose mustache had been forcibly shaved, which is a symbol of honor. And I met the CEO of the Hebrew language radio station in the North Radio, who's a Druze, who said that the Druze will not fight with people. They respect everyone. But he said there are 3 principles: if our honor, our religion, and our land is not respected, we will fight. And he also expressed concern about what was happening to the Druze in Syria.
What does that mean? Do they want their Druze brethren to come to Israel? Are they saying that they would go to, when they say that they would fight if any one of those 3 conditions were met? What does that actually mean? Do you know that in practice?
Well, now they've set up charities to send food and aid to Syrians. I don't think they're going to fight, but they're very concerned, and they're closely watching the situation. And as you know, here the Druze fought for Israel, and in Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights, 12 Druze children were killed by a Hezbollah attack. And ever since then, I think the Druze really feel a greater sense of identity within Israel, and they're not so keen on going back to Syria or having the Golan Heights go back to Syria, knowing what the uncertainty is there. But they're also working on their rights here to strengthen them. They feel they're part and parcel with this country, and they want to be treated with the same respect and dignity as others.
Makes sense. Okay, we're going to link to that article so people can have a more in-depth look at what was said and discussed at your pieces, and obviously in Jeremy's pieces as well. So just take a look at the bottom of the article. I think we're going to close out today's daily podcast. And thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Diana, for being with me today. It's been good to see you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Pleasure.
And thanks to you for listening to the Times Visuals Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves, the video edited by Tomas Gersh. Any comments you have, always email us, podcast@timesvisual.com. And of course, feel free to recommend us to other listeners and rate us wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, take care, be well, have yourselves a good day.